The summer of 1969 was supposed to be the high point of the counterculture. Only weeks earlier, nearly 500,000 young people gathered at Woodstock, celebrating peace, love, and music. America's youth declared themselves the architects of a new era, one free of war, conformity, and fear. But in Los Angeles, under the California sun, another kind of gathering was taking shape. One built not on love and music, but on fear, submission, and manipulation. And over the course of 2 nights in August, that dream of peace was brutally shattered. The murders carried out by Charles Manson and his so-called family were more than acts of violence. They became the symbolic end of the 1960s, a chilling reminder that even in a decade devoted to peace and freedom, darkness could grow in the shadows. The failed musician turned messiah. Charles Manson's story begins far from the glittering lights of Los Angeles. Born in 1934 to a teenage single mother, Manson's childhood was shaped by neglect, abuse, and instability. By the age of 12, he was already in reform school. By adulthood, prison had become his home. Behind bars, Manson discovered his greatest talent: manipulation. He studied psychology, read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, and even dabbled in Scientology. When he was released in 1967, he was a man with no skills, no career, and no direction, except one. The timing could not have been more fateful. San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district was the heart of the hippie movement, a haven for runaways, seekers, and dreamers. Manson slipped into this world like a predator among prey. With a guitar slung over his shoulder and a head full of LSD-fueled philosophy, he presented himself as a guru, a prophet of the new age. And people followed, mostly young women from middle-class families, searching for meaning, belonging, or simply an escape. To them, he was not a failed ex-con. He was a savior. Together, they moved into Spahn Ranch, a decaying former movie set outside Los Angeles. Horses wandered the dirt roads. Old Western buildings crumbled in the desert wind. And in the shadows of this forgotten Hollywood relic, Manson built his family. At the core of Manson's twisted ideology was music, specifically the Beatles. Their 1968 White Album became his Bible. Manson was obsessed with the song Helter Skelter. To most listeners, it was a chaotic track about a carnival slide. To Manson, it was a prophecy, a coded message predicting a coming race war. He told his followers that Black Americans would rise up, overthrow the white establishment, and plunge society into chaos. But they would lack the leadership to rebuild. That, Manson claimed, was the destiny of the family. They would emerge from hiding, literally from a bottomless pit in the desert, and rule the new world. But by the summer of 1969, Manson grew impatient. The apocalypse wasn't happening fast enough, so he decided to start it himself. If society would not collapse on its own, the family would ignite the flames. On the night of August 8, 1969, Manson summoned 4 of his most loyal followers: Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian. He pointed them to a house in Benedict Canyon. Once it had belonged to record producer Terry Melcher, the man who had rejected Manson's dreams of music stardom. Now it was rented by film director Roman Polanski and his wife, actress Sharon Tate. Polanski was away in London, but Tate, 812 months pregnant, was home with friends: hairstylist Jay Sebring, coffee heiress Abigail Folger, and Folger's boyfriend Wojciech Frykowski. Around midnight, the killers cut the phone lines and climbed over the fence. Their first victim was Stephen Parent, an 18-year-old who had just been visiting the caretaker. He never made it out of the driveway. Tex Watson shot him dead in his car. Inside, terror unfolded. The guests were herded into the living room. Pleas for mercy were ignored. Jay Sebring was shot and stabbed. Abigail Folger tried to flee across the lawn but was chased and stabbed 28 times. Frykowski fought desperately but was struck, shot, and stabbed more than 50 times. Finally, Sharon Tate, the young starlet whose baby was due in 2 weeks, was cornered. She begged for her child's life. None was spared. She was stabbed 16 times. Before leaving, Susan Atkins dipped her hand in Tate's blood and scrawled a single word on the front door: pig. The next night, Manson was dissatisfied. The Tate murders had been chaotic, messy, and, he thought, sloppy. This time, he would lead. He directed his followers to the Los Feliz neighborhood, where they stopped at the home of Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, a wealthy supermarket executive and his wife. Manson himself entered first, tying the couple up. Then, like a conductor leading an orchestra, he handed the violence over to his followers. The murders were frenzied. Leno was stabbed dozens of times, a carving fork left protruding grotesquely from his stomach. Rosemary was stabbed in the bedroom, and once again, the walls were defiled with blood. Words like rise, death to pigs, and a misspelled Helter Skelter were scrawled across their home. Los Angeles was in shock. Within 48 hours, 7 people had been slaughtered in acts of unimaginable brutality. At first, detectives were lost. The Tate murders seemed like a possible drug hit. The LaBianca killings appeared unrelated. The city was paralyzed by fear. Meanwhile, Manson and his family remained at Spahn Ranch, behaving as if nothing had happened. The case finally cracked not because of detective work, but because of arrogance. Susan Atkins, arrested on unrelated charges, bragged to her cellmates about carving up Sharon Tate. Word spread quickly to investigators. When police raided Spahn Ranch, they found a bizarre apocalyptic cult: dirty children, stolen cars, LSD trips, and Manson, the self-styled Messiah, smiling coldly at the chaos he had created. In 1970, the trial of Charles Manson and his followers began. It quickly descended into spectacle. Manson carved an X into his forehead, declaring he had been crossed out of society. His female followers followed suit, chanting, singing, and showing unwavering loyalty. The courtroom became theater. At one point, Manson leapt at the judge with a sharpened pencil. His followers promised more blood if he was convicted. Prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi presented the Helter Skelter theory to the jury, an apocalyptic race war envisioned by a madman who never killed with his own hands, yet orchestrated the carnage with chilling precision. In 1971, the verdict was delivered. Charles Manson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten were sentenced to death. Tex Watson received the same fate in a separate trial, but fate intervened. In 1972, California abolished the death penalty. Their sentences were commuted to life imprisonment. The Manson murders were not just a crime. They were a cultural turning point. The 1960s had been defined by dreams of peace, music, and love. But Manson showed the world its darker side. Communes, LSD, and free love were suddenly re-examined, not as symbols of liberation, but as potential breeding grounds for cults and violence. The murder of Sharon Tate became the ultimate symbol of innocence lost. A young mother-to-be, full of promise, brutally silenced by the twisted ideology of a cult. Charles Manson never killed anyone himself, yet his ability to command others to kill turned him into an icon of evil. Over time, the case seeped into American culture: books, films, music. From the bestseller Helter Skelter to Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, The story continues to haunt, fascinate, and terrify. Manson died in prison in 2017, but his name remains synonymous with cult violence, manipulation, and the dark side of charisma. In the end, the Manson family murders marked more than the loss of 9 lives. They marked the death of a dream. The decade of Woodstock, flower power, and free love ended not with music, but with blood in the Hollywood Hills. The peace and love generation had been forced to confront a chilling reality. Under the surface of freedom and rebellion lurked vulnerability, manipulation, and violence. The 1960s ended not with harmony, but with screams that still echo more than half a century later.